right, welcome back to another off the shelf, the final installment of The Abandoned Empress.
Holy shit, we finished a series.
We had volumes 8 and 9, the final volume. So it's only 2 volumes. So we did this series, I think, in only like 3 episodes, just 3 or 4 episodes. Um, and it is completed. And how do you feel about that now that you have read this entire story? This is the first reincarnation story that we've finished.
Ah, It's. I don't think it didn't end badly. It felt a little bit rushed to me. I'll say that. It felt just a tad bit of a rushed ending. And maybe that's because there's a really weird split, in my opinion, where it feels like most of like the character dynamics and relationships from the early series are wrapped up in like the previous stuff that we read. And then we start here introducing the
Ji-Eun.
yeah uh yeah we introduced the girl that got transported to this world
And
from the original
started all
story.
this shit to begin with.
And like there's some interesting stuff that comes of that, like, oh, she also remembers this, and she is scheming against the main character actively at this point, as opposed
Instead
to
of just,
this everything going wrong being a consequence of the main character and the prince having a falling out, or the emperor. And that was at that point I was like pretty like, okay, this is getting interesting. And then it just kind of ends.
yeah, the climax of this story is definitely interesting because it spends the series spends the majority of its run building up to the reintroduction of Ji-Eun, which we know is going to happen, because history repeats itself. And when she is introduced, she immediately starts to make decisions different from the ones that she had originally made. Um, and but like the story itself is also so different already to where it was when the events of the original like conflict took place, that like there's no way she could have just made the same decision. Like it wouldn't have been possible for the same events to take place. Like
Mhm.
Aristia did what she intended. She made it impossible for the same thing to happen again,
And
which
yeah,
really removed, in my opinion, I think what it did was it removed June's ability to do anything she wanted and forced her down a path of making different contradictory decisions in the hopes of succeeding this time.
yeah, like
Because what we find out is that like Jiyun actually also had a pretty bad ending. It's not just Aristia. Like Jiyun had a pretty fucking terrible ending as well. And there's a lot of trauma there too.
but I think the problem is that everything with the prince is more or less resolved. Like they do introduce the poison that affects Aristia's fertility and
Mhm.
the prince's mood, but they catch that pretty damn quickly, and it's just like, oh, okay, now we just need to be more careful about the food we're eating.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, so is Jiun infertile? Not Jiun, Aristia infertile? Just
Who
gonna keep that
knows?
hold up until the end of the series. It's a matter of when we find out more than anything.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I feel like the attempts to create new drama didn't necessarily land in these last couple books, and Jiun just didn't really get enough breathing time as a villain or impact enough for me to be like, okay, she feels like a credible threat in lieu of the fact that the poisoning is just kind of not the most uh interesting like end game scenario. Like there is another villain. Like the actual main villain is the guy that takes in June. It's a very
The dude.
trash to sort of
Yeah.
dynamic going on there. But trash to and like Remarried Empress is a dynamic that like got fleshed out over how many volumes now? This gets wrapped up in like a volume and a half.
Yeah. I will also admit that as much as I knew just by the vibe how her romance was gonna end, right? This kind of like three-way romance thing she had going on. As much as I knew by the writing on the wall by the end of book 4 or 5 exactly what was gonna happen, it didn't stop me from hoping that she wasn't going to end up with the prince. And I thought what the green-haired dude did was very interesting. Yeah, like, arguably, him and Carson, right? Like, her two childhood friends, are far more interesting characters than the prince. Because the prince changes, but he changes simply, I think, by result of like exposure therapy to Aristia, who has changed so drastically that he can't act the same as he did before. Like, I hate to say that he doesn't have autonomy in the story.
He doesn't.
Yeah, he changes as a reaction. Whereas green haired dude, who I can never remember the name of, and Carson are actually very interesting.
I kind of like the idea, like even if the prince and Aristia ended up together, I like the idea if it was just because the prince had a very different life because of the changes being made here and Aristia claiming more independence. That's not the case though. They make it pretty clear that the prince's reactions were from the poison in the previous timeline.
Yeah,
And
and
it, like that removes all agency of the character and like, oh, okay, this is like it removes all agents from that character and it makes it less interesting when Aristia is contemplating like how much she has to view them as the same person.
yeah, and her goodbye to Carson just broke my heart because I would have preferred, I think it would have made for a much more interesting story if she had completely broken away from the prince and ended up with either Carson or the green-haired dude. And the prince had had to figure his own life out. Whether that was with Ji-yoon or not doesn't matter to me. But ended up in a different situation as well. But it feels like, even though, like, in the first two volumes, she was so emphatic about wanting to stay as far away from him as possible, right? Like, she had PTSD, she had trauma, she didn't want to go near him. But by book 5, they're spending all day together every day, and they're doing everything together. But at the same time, it was Carson and her green haired friend who put in all the footwork to sort of draw her out of her shell and inspire her to learn new things and support her. And the prince is just in her orbit changing because he's in her orbit. I don't know. I don't hate the prince, certainly. But I do think that perhaps the story wouldn't have felt as rushed or might have wrapped up, at least for me, more satisfyingly if she hadn't ended up with him, personally. And obviously, that's a huge story change. And it's not as if I didn't know that she was gonna end up with the prince. Like, it was not a surprise for me. It's just like, yeah, I can't say that it surprised me. Like, I
It
knew
was
by the
being
end of
written in
book
this
4.
direction since like halfway into the series. You could kind of see this is the direction they were going.
Yeah, I knew by the end of book 4. I didn't really have.
And what do I always say? It's always the bad boy that ends up the main love interest in these stories because they're the most interesting one to be like, oh, he's being fixed by the events of the story. Like Carson is they like, yes, it's probably the healthier dynamic, like when you actually break it down. But is that the interesting story there?
But green, let me raise you, green-haired boy. Our little psychopathic,
Look, I actually think that would have been a good
sociopathic.
alternative if they didn't turn around and have him actively try to have her assassinated at one point before written.
Look,
And he got
look,
written out way too early.
look, I love our little sociopathic, possessive moron. He's a maybe my favorite character in this entire series because he just goes off the rails. Like, off script, off rails. Like, if I can't have her, no one can. Poison.
I think the problem with the prince is having that kind of dynamic of being the like the clear like the darker brooding character who's changed by the story is that the prince, he loses a lot of the autonomy because of that poison plot point. Like he's not a character being changed by the story. Like any misconceptions he had about Aristia that were like properly his were absolved like in the first couple volumes because of this plot point.
Yeah.
He hasn't really had like a negative view of Aristia since those early volumes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it that darker
It's
side and that like the unpredictable side was because it's just that's not the character anymore. It's not what they're that's it makes the story less interesting for what they were trying to do.
it's not to say that I don't still enjoy this story, right? Because I do enjoy The Abandoned Empress. And it's wonderful that it's finished. But it's certainly not one of my favorites anymore. I think I felt a lot more strongly about like my positivity towards the series up until book 7 because I was really enjoying it through book 7. And then I do agree the ending was rushed. I think they really rushed very fast through the arrival of Ji-yoon and everything that happened after. But I also think that the time period between Ji-yoon arriving in the original timeline and events taking place was also very fast. So perhaps it was matching timelines, but it was still too fast.
Actually,
Especially because we spent,
I don't think it was matching timelines. They make it a specific point that Ji-yoon is a lot younger than she was before.
yeah. No, they did go through a bunch of time. Like she was queen for a while.
So
Yeah.
it's not necessarily the timeline thing. I think it's just that Ji-yoon as a character is not given enough time to breathe. And I think because she's kind of the end game sort of noticeable in the forefront threat
Hmm.
for Aristia, that really affects how satisfying the ending feels. Um
Yeah.
that said, I've been a little harsh on the series, but did you read the author's notes at the end of the series?
I did, yes.
Where it's like, I'm sorry I couldn't give you more of Jioon's backstory and some of the stuff we had planned. Was this series cut off a bit for reasons outside the author's control?
Um, yeah, so I think from what I remember. So you know how there's after stories, right? In a lot of well, you don't read a ton of manhwa. Typically in manhwa, what'll happen is the series will end, right? And then the author and artist will usually get together and they'll produce anywhere from 10 to 50 more episodes of different endings or after stories or following the children and such. Like, for example, Solo Leveling started a whole new series in the after chapters and then it got picked up for serialization. So now we're getting a whole second Solo Leveling series following the kids, right? The son of the main character. Um, and I was reading another manhwa recently. They just published the last after chapter. There were 60 after chapters after the original story ended. It was almost half the length of the series over again. So that happens, and those were not included here. So if there are any of those in this series, they did not adapt them. And second of all, I'll, one of the things I've noticed, and we saw this in Remarried Empress as well, is that the timeline and demands that these kind of manhwa adaptations place on singular artists when they're working mostly alone, right? Not like Dubu Reduced Studios, which has like more than one artist working on it, but when it's just one or two artists working on adapting this, the story does change somewhat. Like they have to take out, add in some stuff to make it flow better in like the art form. The light novel to manhwa transition is never one to one. In some series, it differs more. In some series, it differs less. That depends. The author always approves it, though, right? So you know that this is what the author wanted to communicate through the manhwa overall, even if it has changed some stuff from the light novel to suit the format better, first of all. And then, second of all, because of the demands that it places on these artists with how many episodes they're having to put out and the quality of them, there is a very large trend of these artists getting extremely ill or falling very sick partway through and having to take really long breaks, cut out planned episodes, condense stuff down into a smaller format to get it
Hmm.
out because they're too sick to keep doing it for so long. I don't so I was not following this as it came out because this is a bit of an older one. So, I'm gonna look it up real quick, but I do believe that what happened is probably that the artist did get sick. Unfortunately, I don't really have the ability to check out like the author's notes in the original posted webtoon chapters because this is only posted to um T.H.E, and T.H.E is one of the ones where you have to pay a certain amount of coins per episode if you want to access them. And also, it doesn't appear as if they've labeled like separately author's notes here. I've got like, I'm looking at the season 2 finale and then season 3 preview and then season 3 episode 1. So if I look at the preview, it looks like it's okay. Yeah, these are just fully finished preview frames of like certain episodes. There's no like author's note in it. Unlike, and we've seen the author's notes before in other series, so like you know what I mean by like author's note. So what I'm willing to bet is it's probably that the artist genuinely did get like very ill, and so they had to significantly cut short the adaptation that they were like the full planned adaptation. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I do believe the novel is long enough that it probably would have demanded more chapters, um, had it been more had it been translated more one to one, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So it might have been a little bit like the ending might have been a lot more fleshed out in the original manga, or not manga, light novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It usually is in this sort of situation. As this is not the only series we run into this with, but in a lot of other series, is the author recovers relatively well. They'll take like an extended hiatus and then eventually they'll be back with better pacing. Remarried Empress did this. That's why so the first season was like 70 something episodes. We talked about this last time we did Remarried Empress because we finished the season. The second season is like 40 episodes because the author got sick in the middle and they just had to end the season early and then take like a six to like 8 month break while the artist recovered. So there's a decent chance that yes, this was probably originally meant to probably go out to like 10 or 11 volumes worth of content, and they just couldn't do that in the end. Like it just was not feasible for the health of the author and the artist. Um so yeah. The other, I suppose the other option is there is one other option, and that's that the series interest and readership had declined so much by volume 7 or 8 that the studio producing it decided that they did not want to continue it for an extra like 20 to 50 chapters. But I've not really seen that happen very often. Like the few times that I've seen a studio drop a webtoon, they have just dropped it, right? They don't let the author finish it up or like sum the story up and stuff. They'll just stop. So I mean, it could be that the studio decided to let them kind of wrap up and finish quickly, but I've never seen that happen before. Not to say it can't. I've just not seen it. I've not seen a manhwa studio pull a Bleach and tell the author you have this many chapters to finish and then you're done. So make of that what you will. I'd be willing to bet it's probably closer to health issues
Mm.
as an issue. You had Jack Jack.
Yeah, I did have Jack
It
Jack.
was so cute. But yeah, I will say the art is beautiful. I have no fault with the art of this series. I do think it just
Mm.
looks stunning. Especially like the full page layouts and spreads. I think each of the covers kind of shows like important character up to book 8, it's important characters, but book 9 is their wedding scene. It becomes a full page. It's the last page of the book. It's their wedding. I actually was mildly surprised that we didn't get any after chapters about like their children. Because I know that there are chapters after about their children in the light novel. So that's definitely something that they didn't get to adapt.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we finished it.
I it's funny because you if you go back to the episodes of this that we've already filmed, you were really liking this in comparison to most of the other villainous stuff that we've been reading. Like this has been one of your standout favorites in terms of how you felt about the series. And for it to kind of flip so drastically is interesting to hear. Because I was not super sold on this series at the beginning, and it grew on me a little throughout it. I was feeling pretty positive by the time we got to like 4, 5, 6, 7, but I also don't love this ending. Alendis. Alendis is the name of the green-haired boy.
Yeah, he's just not involved in this last section at all.
I know, because he went all sociopath back in book 4
I
and
remember
was like,
back then I was surprised at how quickly they had resolved that issue. I'm like, oh, so maybe he's going to move forward as more of an ally character. We don't have to be as uneasy about. No,
no.
no, he's just gone.
Yeah, he just dips. Like he's gone. He's not coming back. He's not mentioned. He doesn't. It's not. It's
This
just
series is
not a thing.
banishing people.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I feel like that's
Oh no, did you drop your toy? I'll be
a
right
little
back.
abrupt.
No, I'm not throwing your toy for you.
Yeah, okay. So, in a note, just to round out the story for us. In the final chapters of the novel, um, Aristia and Ruvelis are shown to have 3 children. Diana and fraternal twins named Adrian and Elena. So they do have 3 kids. So obviously they live happily ever after with 3 children. um, which is, I suppose, good to note.
The perfect Disney ending.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I think maybe I was just a little bit like I was excited to have a like the transmigrator, the isekai person, the person being sent to another world to be a villain.
uh-huh.
And I think like that aspect of the series really let me down.
Yeah.
Like that was something I was excited for from book 1 if we go back all the way to that discussion.
Yeah. And it took a while for her to show up. Like it took a long time before she showed up. And then we didn't really we didn't really get a whole ton once she showed up. It's unfortunate. I do
Yeah.
think it's unfortunate. Um I suppose one other interesting thing to note. I might have brought this up earlier, but do you remember how old this is? Like when the series first started coming out?
No.
2014, 2015. So this is old in the general scheme of this genre. Um it is quite old. Yeah. Just a little disappointing. I think that's my takeaway from this. It's just a little disappointing. I think it could have done a lot better. And are there any other things you wanted to cover about it?
Not not in particular. I think I've mostly said my piece. This is not as long of a section. I know we if this comes out in the same order we're recording and we just got done with like a 40-minute discussion. This is not as long as that last series we did off the shelf for. So
No, there's
no.
not much to say here. I think
Yeah.
the series is finished out. I would recommend it if you want to read a finished series that you can get all the volumes for. Um, and it's relatively old, so it's got a lot of the hallmarks of like the the genre before it became oversaturated. because most of the stuff in this genre has come out post 2020. Like, like I'd say probably like there was a huge boom between 2018 and 2021. And so most of the stuff has been coming out in that boom or after. And so this is significantly before that. So keep that in mind. But
I I still think the series is worth checking out. It's not like the ending doesn't ruin the entire series. It's just not a very strong ending.
yeah, no, it is a good series and it is completed. Um, and accessible. And I do enjoy that. The art is beautiful. I do think that the author did genuinely write a very engaging story up until the very end. And even the ending, I mean, you knew it was coming. It didn't make us stop reading it, you know? We were still engaged in the story.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's just maybe also check out the light novel since it does go a little bit more into detail towards the end for sure. Yeah. Well, I do know what's next, and it is not what we're recording next. So, I technically don't know what's next. And neither do you. So with that being said, we'll be back with another off the shelf eventually, not on the Abandoned Empress, as we are finished with this series.
Until
Congrats,
you
Knick
get the
Knack.
itch to read the light novel.
Huh?
Until you get the itch to read the light novel and I have to follow you.
Those have not been published in English in paper. I am not doing that right now. Look, there are enough series coming out in paper that I do not need to seek out a way for you to read a series that is not coming out in paper currently. That's the rule I'm making for now. So we will see you next time.
Like, comment, subscribe.